Rafe Heydel-Mankoo is here. Let's talk first of all, though, about the 100,000 fuel poverty OAPs this morning who are waking up. This is now the full impact of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves' budget, which seems to now be displeasing almost everybody. Even the Bank of England boss, Andrew Bailey's come out and backed business and said, yeah, job losses are coming. You know, we're going to have to keep interest rates very high because of this, and the economy is going to suffer.
Well, what is the point of the Labour Party? It's supposed to be the caring party,
yes,
dealing with the people of this country, if it won't look after our elderly. You know, when we were young, we used to hear these terrible stories in the paper about, you know, pensioners freezing to death.
Yes.
And we thought that era was over, didn't we? Now it looks as if that's going to come back
Labour
with 100,000. Labour is bringing this back, you know. And when you have a Labour government doing this, who are prioritising, as I said before the break, £14 billion that was allocated for pay rises,
yes,
for train drivers and civil servants and doctors and teachers. Again, police are getting it, and our most vulnerable are actually dealing with this sort of a thing. I think it's absolutely unconscionable to imagine. Now, look, I'm somebody who doesn't think everyone should get a winter fuel allowance. Right. You know, if you're Rod Stewart or Elton John or the Duke of Norfolk, you don't deserve it. But you know, have a better way of determining this. Tie it to the basic rate of tax, for example, and then taper it off. Yeah. There are ways you can do this.
Of course there were. And then when it happened and when it was announced that they were going to do it, this despite the fact, of course, that they were haranguing the Tories for even thinking about doing it when they were in opposition, suggesting that they wouldn't do it in government. Yet another lie from Keir Starmer. There were plenty of charities, you know, Help the Aged and others, who said, look, there's plenty of different ways of doing it. You don't have to start it now. You could have fed it through and started it next winter and had a much more, you know, sort of, you know, considered approach to it, as you say, so that you can still give it to the most vulnerable. But again, this is where they go and tell more lies, because again, they've said, only a small number of pensioners will be affected and most of the people who need it will be able to get it. Well, no, because in order to apply for pension credit, you have to fill out a form that I think takes something like 243 different questions online that you have to answer.
But this is why it's a nonsense. For the first thing, we now know from Lisa Nanny and others that there is internal modelling that shows that 100,000 people will go into poverty. That's the story of the day. They knew this beforehand. Again, as I said before the break, this is another breach of the ministerial code to keep us in the dark about the actual things going on here. But secondly, if everyone goes on to universal credit, no money will be saved whatsoever. No. It's actually going to cost even more money to the Exchequer. So what is the purpose of this entire thing?
Which again begs the question, because even if they got everybody they wanted to get, both in the farming area and in the pensioner area, they wouldn't have enough money to run the NHS for a week. So it makes no sense.
It just goes to show the degree of incompetence here, that they can't even do proper modelling of things beforehand.
Well, this is the trouble. I mean, I said before this lot got in, I said none of them will know what to do, because none of them have been, apart from Pat McFadden and Ed Miliband, bizarrely, they haven't actually been in government at all. They don't know what they're doing. And let's talk about Rachel Reeves, by the way, because she's now under even more pressure. Not only did she claim to be an economist at the Bank of England, which was untrue, not only did she claim to be an economist at HBOS, which was also untrue, it turns out now that she signed a document and claimed she was an economist while her updated LinkedIn profile said she wasn't, and that would appear to be a massive, massive error, which may actually be illegal.
Yeah, I think there are serious questions that she needs to answer. There's actually, well, in previous decades, again, these will be grounds of resignation, because the level to which things have been falsified. I mean, there are so many memes going around. You know, Patrick O'Flynn put out a great tweet yesterday, which was like, I don't get all this hostility towards Rachel Reeves. How come people want to take down someone who won an Olympic gold medal, was the first woman up Everest, and discovered penicillin?
Yes. And we've got other memes of her winning the FA Cup, you know, being the first woman to fly across the Atlantic, being the first woman on the moon. I mean, people are making fun of her at such a ridiculous degree. But she filled out a form to become director of a Leeds-based charity in a submission to a government body. This is according to Guido Fawkes, who've done some great work on this. It's now further escalated the row over her employment history. Richard Holden, the Shadow Paymaster General, has now said she's banged to rights. He's sent a letter to her asking for specific answers to specific questions about when she worked for the Bank of England, what she did, when she worked for HBOS, what she did. I mean, I think she's in trouble.
Well, pride comes before a fall, you know, and none of this was necessary. But the whole point was, before the election, of course, she was being put forward as being the sensible, experienced Iron Chancellor against all the nonsense of the Tories. Now it turns out she was basically a cloakroom attendant.
Yeah, she was answering the phone and making the tea. I mean, which is nothing wrong with answering the phone and making the tea, by the way, but you don't pretend that you're the CEO of the company and write it down on sort of applications to be directors of charities, do you? Extraordinary. Meanwhile, let's talk about the great public sector in this country, because the Labour Party, of course, love the public sector, want to give it as much money as they could possibly give it. But according to a piece in the Telegraph this morning, public sector workers are becoming less and less productive.
What a surprise there. So,
knock me over with a feather.
A 1.2% decline in the last quarter.
Yes.
They are actually 8.5% lower in productivity than before COVID.
Yeah.
Whereas the rest of us are 2% higher in productivity. That tells you everything. In fact, the public sector is less productive now than in 1997, which, of course, is when Tony Blair came in. Quelle surprise that that's happened.
Yeah.
And but despite all of that, we've now actually, for the first time ever, reached more than 6 million people employed in the public sector. I think, look to America. You now have this new Department of Government Efficiency with Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. They're going to take an axe to all of this. I think it's time we got the sort of Javier Milei, Afuera, coming in and we can cut some of this excess fat, because clearly these DEI hires and these people have no idea about...
Well, funny you should mention Javier Milei, because Elon Musk has actually put out a tweet this morning saying impressive progress in Argentina, because basically what he's managed to do in the short space of time that he's been president of Argentina is what economists said was impossible. He's apparently slashed 3,000 plus regulations in 6 months.
Yeah, this is precisely what we need to have here. And it's just so depressing, actually, to see the energy that you're seeing in America when it comes to these sorts of issues, and how here, even on the right, people are so lethargic and simply don't have the ambition and the motivation to do what we can all see.
And speaking of, you know, the sort of the red hot heat of the technological revolution which is happening in America, have a look at some of this, these pictures we've got here. This is Donald Trump meeting Elon Musk at SpaceX, where the 6th successful SpaceX launch going up into space has happened. And this, again, this is Elon Musk's kind of side show, isn't it? I mean, his main event is Tesla. His main event is you know, X and running free speech in America and the world. Just every now and again, he fires a rocket up into space. It's absolutely extraordinary.
I think this is the heaviest thing ever to be lifted into orbit ever, actually. But what's telling is that, you know, when America and the West were great, they had the backing of the government behind them. Biden and Harris never once went to any SpaceX launch.
No.
They never congratulated Elon Musk. This man is a world leader. You know, he's up there in the ranks of Edison and Tesla and everybody else. You think about Reagan and NASA, Nixon and NASA, you know...
Even Kennedy and NASA.
Kennedy. And the fact that Biden and Harris are so biased and so vindictive and so narrow-minded in their thinking that they can't encourage one of America's best assets.
Even Peter Mandelson yesterday was urging the government, Keir Starmer and others, to embrace Elon Musk and not to kind of repel him. We've got Peter Kyle coming on a little bit later on, who's the Minister for Science and Technology, and he's already kind of sort of, shall we say, softening this government stance on Elon Musk, because there are others in Parliament who want to sort of haul Elon Musk before a parliamentary committee and demand to know why he's not clamping down on all this horrible free speech.
Well, I hope you'll ask him why he didn't. The government didn't invite him over to that major conference that was here a few weeks ago.
Indeed. And speaking of a waste of public money, an incredible story on page 8 of the Daily Mail: £208 million, the projected cost of the COVID inquiry. They talk about wanting to save money. This is enough to pay 6,000 doctors' salaries, and it's going to be the most expensive investigation of its kind in British history. £150,000 a day being spent on the statutory inquiry, and we don't even know what they're doing, really, do we?
No, it cancels out half the cost of the farmers' inheritance tax just on one inquiry. And as we know, these inquiries end up going nowhere. You know, nobody actually ends up reading the report.
No.
But 70 million was paid to legal firms and solicitors. 124 million was spent over the budget originally. I mean, it's just, even the woman leading the chairman, Baroness Hallett, £500,000 for her own work on all this. and 1.2 million to ensure emotional well-being of participants. I mean, it's an absolute farce.
I know, absolutely ridiculous. And, one from Charlie saying, inheritance tax is nothing but a joke. The fact that we pay all the tax through our life on everything we buy, sell, save and earn, we then pass another tax bill on to our children. Well, this is the thing. I mean, it's only really the politics of envy that has inheritance tax as a thing, because the tax that you pass, the money you pass on to your children, whether it's a farm, whether it's money that you've got in the bank, whether it's a house, is all money you've already paid tax on. And yet they want to tax the taxed money, so they tax it twice.
I mean, if you want to be very simple about this, if you want to do some sort of farm inheritance tax, say, look, if you're going to sell a farm, you pay a tax on it. But if you're going to give it to your children, no tax on it. If it's going to remain a working farm within the family, handed down by the generations, let it carry on as it is. But if you're going to just sell it to a stranger, then you can pay some sort of tax on it. That seems very sensible.
Yeah, well, it does. But if you've already been paying tax all the way through your existence, it seems ridiculous that the government takes something from you every single time you do anything. You know, it's absolutely nonsensical. Let's get a voice note from Sue on Starmer.
Hi, Mike. This is Sue again from Lee. I think this is goes a lot deeper than we actually think. The farmers, free speech, it's all about controlling people, controlling our food, controlling what we say. I mean, look at where he's at. He's out there speaking to leaders who control everything about their people. He went to the COP 24, 29, whatever it is now. Again, there's people out there who control their people. I think we can see what's going on here.
Well, he'd like to control his people, probably. He'd love to control the Labour Party. He'd love to control Britain. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem as though he's controlling either at the moment, because there's some backbench MPs from the Labour Party who are getting pretty upset about all the people that he's upsetting, because they're all going to be out of a job coming up pretty soon. Next, we're going to be talking about a great many other stories, including those poor people at The Guardian. Apparently, they're thinking of going on strike. There is a God. 6:46. Let's get a voice note from Dave on Ed Miliband.
Great show, Mike. I was just wondering, how's Miliband's solar farms going up north when they're all covered under snow? They're going to be producing a lot of energy now, aren't they? We got one man brushing them off, thousands of mirrors. Great show, Mike. Dave from Southend.
Dave from Southend, what a great point. I've no idea what happens to solar-powered farms under the weight of snow. I presume they don't work, I would imagine. We might not have to ask a scientist for that. But, of course, Ed Miliband isn't a scientist. As Julie Hartley-Brewer often said, he's about as qualified to be a scientist as she is. He doesn't know anything about science, and yet he prognosticates about it all the time.
And he's the most qualified man in the Labour government.
Yes, I know. And he's actually been a minister before. Well, don't forget, he was the guy that told us all to buy diesel cars.
Oh, yes.
Because they were much safer for the environment. A couple of stories around the sort of asylum seeker scenario. A child rapist who was once saved from deportation by do-gooder airline crew was yesterday jailed for a decade. This is a guy who was attacked a 15-year-old girl in December, got her pregnant against her will. It was uncovered only after the victim's sister found a doctor's letter confirming the girl had had an abortion. This guy was born in Congo, initially admitted the drunken attack, but spent months trying to overturn the plea. But it turned out that previously, when he was supposed to be being deported, one of these do-gooder plane loads of people and an air crew decided to stop him from being deported.
This enrages me more than almost anything else.
I know.
These do-gooders who have absolutely no idea of the backstory. They simply see a person of colour in handcuffs and they think, oh, victim here.
Yeah.
And I want every single person on that plane to actually go to the victim and explain to the victim precisely why they did what they did.
Yeah.
Actually, be held accountable.
They actually prevented the plane from taking off, right? The crew on an Air France jet prevented him from taking off. He became a protest leader for a campaign to shut Campsfield House Detention Centre. I mean, he was granted leave to remain by court in 2010, went on to work as a hospital porter, now going to prison because he's raped a child.
And, of course, it's not the only time we had there was a Somali on a British plane. Same thing happened there, happened for that as well.
Yeah.
Of course, we had during the whole Windrush thing, people were stopped going off, who then went on to re-offend in the most brutal way.
Serious criminals.
Serious criminals, you know. Nothing but contempt for these sorts of people. And they should go to the victims and explain to them why their do-gooder status means that they have actually enabled these victims to be hurt so badly.
I hope these people are satisfied with what they did. Another case as well in the Telegraph today, a violent Portuguese drug dealer cannot be deported because of EU free movement rules. This guy came to this country many years ago. Antonio Monteiro, his name is, found by an immigration judge to be a serious threat to the fundamental interests of British society. He was at one time an aspiring professional footballer, but he became a violent drug dealer, robbery, weapon possession offences. In his latest conviction, he was jailed for 5 years, but they can't deport him, apparently, to Portugal, because under pre-Brexit EU rules, if you've lived here for 10 years, you can stay, no matter what.
Rubbish. The Danes always do things which break the rules. They've been hauled up before the European courts many times. And what can the European courts do? Nothing, because no court can enforce international law. It's unenforceable. If the will was there, we could kick them out. The Italians have no problems doing this. The Greeks have no problem doing this. We should take a leaf out of their books.
Absolutely right. Let's talk about The Guardian, because they're back in the news. I mean, fresh from the therapy that they were being offered just the other day, just in case anybody was upset by Donald Trump being re-elected President of the United States of America, and just before they'd said that they needed to get even more money into their coffers to fight Trump. I mean, that was their mission statement, right? It now turns out that some of them will be going on strike. In fact, most of them will be going on strike, which I presume will mean the paper won't come out, because if it did come out, it would mean that there were people breaking the strike, and that surely wouldn't be something The Guardian would do.
Well, I mean, no one's going to really miss The Guardian not writing anything.
They'll miss it at the BBC. They won't have any stories to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, The Guardian is the most read newspaper at the BBC. That's we've known that for a long time.
Well, I think we worked out that if it wasn't for the BBC, their circulation would be cut in half, because the BBC gets about 25,000 copies of the paper every day.
But the funding, it's funny that they're going through all of this, because the funding of The Guardian is so mysterious.
It is. The Scott Trust.
There's so much stuff going on there, and they're so keen to do the investigative journalism, and yet they won't come forward about actually how they're funded. But, I think the sooner that they are split up and disappear, the better. Yeah,
well, apparently there's a row going on because the owners of The Guardian want to sell off The Observer, which I think has a circulation of about 3.5, to Tortoise, which is this new kind of social media organisation headed by a former BBC man, James, what's his face? I can't remember his name.
I can't remember.
But he was in the government as well, in the Tory government. But anyway, we'll come back to that. So there's a walkout organised because they don't think they should be selling off The Observer. So we shall see how that all goes. Let's talk about new media, though, social media particularly, because Australia have just announced a ban on social media and phones for under 16s, and apparently this government is considering the same. Peter Kyle is coming on this show later on, the Science and Technology Minister. It's something that's coming, isn't it?
It's coming, but I'm very wary of this. You know, this is the new Online Safety Act, which I think is a severe curtailment of people's rights online. I'm very wary of Ofcom getting into the internet sphere.
Yeah.
We don't want to have, Ofcom basically regulating what happens online. There's already enough censorship going on by the tech platforms. I'm all in favour of children not having access to this sort of stuff. What I've advocated for a long time is what Professor Jonathan Haidt at Harvard University has advocated too. Get child-friendly smartphones.
Yes.
Smartphones that have GPS so that parents know where your kids are, but smartphones that can't access the internet, don't have these apps and so forth. Because children aren't actually on laptops, they're on phones.
Yes.
So it's the technology, it's the actual equipment you can deal with to stop them getting on. But how are you going to stop kids who are teenagers from going online? You can't do age verification because any child will know how to get around it.
Well, I mean, as the father of...
they'll use VPN.
As the father of 4 children, they're very, very good at getting around the rules that you set for them.
They know far more than we do.
They do. I mean, with each one of my kids, from the youngest to the oldest, the younger ones are better and better at whatever the technology is that they've acquired and they've mastered, and they know much more about everything than most of the people trying to stop them from doing stuff.
Oh, I tried to play Grand Theft Auto with my godson the other day, and I spent about 20 minutes in the parking space. I couldn't even get out of the parking space. What are you doing?
Well, speaking of which, we mentioned this on the show yesterday, actually, but Jaguar has completely revamped its image. I don't know if we've got that video to show yet, but there's an incredibly ridiculous video that they put out, which we will play later. But we put out certainly the new logo, which they've done. They've done away with what they call the growler, which is, of course, the big cat logo that they have. Instead, they've got this rather ridiculous-looking font and this modern-looking kind of badge, which bears no resemblance to the great history of one of the great British marks of cars.
It's appalling, and I'm afraid it's going to be another go woke, go broke scenario here, because Jaguar is its legendary style. The whole image of Jaguar. People buy into that brand. And to abandon it. So if you want to start a new type of thing, create a new company under the Jaguar umbrella. Right, but don't destroy one brand in order to go in another direction. And they are chasing a clientele clientele. I mean, you look at the sort of woke milquetoast, you know, type of characters who are never going to want to have a Jaguar or any sort of a car like that, and you're alienating actually your core brand, and it's anti-British fundamentally.
It is, because when you think back to the, I mean, whenever I see an E-Type Jaguar, I used to always want one as a child. You know, you used to see people driving around in them, and even now you see them and you just think, wow, what a car. It is the sort of epiphany of modern engineering to me, that back in the 1960s you could make a car that super long bonnet, went like the clappers. It was absolutely the most, it was the sexiest car that anybody had ever designed, and it still is, you know. And the idea that they've now turned into this kind of woke, ludicrous, there's the new Jaguar symbol, instead of having an actual Jaguar, which by the way is a big cat, you know.
And it's completely unrecognisable, you know. That cat was so distinctive and everyone knew it, and I can't believe that nobody working in that company didn't see that this is going to be a complete cataclysmic failure. This is not a new company, this is an old company.
I know, it's absolutely shocking.